everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com, and it's time to talk about WWE's Clash of Champions. Now, I think it's fair to say this wasn't the most spectacular event in terms of match quality, especially since we've recently seen the likes of, AEW and NXT putting out really eventful, really action-packed shows. But in terms of progressing storylines and angles and stuff, there was a little bit to talk about here and there, especially a big, notable return towards the end of the night and the setting up of the next big feud for the Universal Championship. So, without any further ado, let's talk about what happened at WWE Clash of Champions. Also want to give a big shout out to my boy, Ash Ketchum, for finally winning the Pokemon League at 10 years old, and it only took him 22 years, but he's still 10 years. Well done, Ash Ketchum. Dreams can come true. In fact, the boyhood dream has indeed come true in the Pokeverse. Now onto the wrestling, of course, and from one of my favourites to another as well, as Lince Dorado opened the show in triple threat cruiserweight action against Drew Gulak and Humberto Carrillo. This was one of two matches on the Kickoff show, and it got off to a pretty fast start. A lot of matches, actually, that was quite a recurring theme. A lot of matches on this show started with one opponent charging the other across the ring, and that's how Drew Gulak kicked things off. But ultimately, this did seem a little bit more of a showcase for Carrillo, who they do seem interested in pushing towards the main event scene in the cruiserweight division. He got some nice showcase spots. One or two little miscommunications, to be honest, between all three men did plague this match a little bit, but I don't think it was a bad match by any stretch of the imagination. There were a few nice little moments though between all three men, such as like chain submissions simultaneously being put on each other at the same time. A lot of roll-up attempts as well in quick succession. But ultimately, I think this was maybe one of the less spectacular cruiserweight kickoff matches we've seen. It was still decent though. I can't complain too much. The finish came when Carrillo avoided a shooting star press from Lince, sort of. He still kind of caught him. Then Carrillo hit Lince with his Aztec press, sort of. Again, didn't quite fully connect, even though I think he was probably meant to. And then Drew Gulak rolled in and kind of stole the pinfall, hurling Carrillo out of the way and rolling up Lince in like a bridging sort of German position. And again, it was kind of a sloppy finish, really. It was another one of those moments that didn't do this match as much justice as it perhaps deserved, with the referee correctly spotting that Lince's shoulders weren't both down, and it did delay the pinfall a little bit. But yeah, it was a decent match, and I think as well, the right result to have Drew Gulak retain the Cruiserweight Championship for now. Next up, the second match on the Kickoff show, and one which, honestly, in the build-up to this show over the course of the week, I would have expected it to be a showcase match on the main portion of the show. It was a surprise to see it on the Kickoff, in fact. It was Cedric Alexander taking on the United States champion, AJ Styles. Styles was alone for this match. We didn't see Gallows or Anderson at ringside, and he really seemed like he wanted to prove a point. I guess that was the story coming into this. And also we had a classic moment of comedy as the referee held up the title upside down. Ho, what japes we have on what happened at. And I have to say, wow, who on earth did Cedric Alexander piss off backstage? No, I might be overreacting just a little bit, because this wasn't a squash by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a dominant and decisive display by AJ Styles over a challenger who really seemed to be on the end of like a pretty consistent push over the past few weeks. This was another match that got off to a really, really hot start, actually, as Cedric hit AJ with an immediate Michinoku driver for two, but then AJ quickly took control, hitting a big kind of vertical suplex, maybe even a brainbuster on the apron, and then a big Styles clash on the outside. He rolled Cedric back in, 1, 2, and then he lifted his shoulder off the canvas, which I didn't really want to see, because I think I disagree with that part of the storytelling of this match. Just because you've got this hot, up-and-coming babyface, and you're basically saying the champion could have pinned him there if he wanted to, but he didn't. And then really, after not much more time had elapsed in the match, to be honest with you, AJ Styles hit a big phenomenal forearm, and then another Styles clash, and picked up a really, really dominant victory. As I said, this was a very surprising display. I thought this match would be far more back and forth than it actually was. Then Gallows and Anderson did come out eventually, and then they started to, beat Cedric down, and it was all set up for him to make a big fiery babyface comeback, get some of his heat back after losing the match. But instead, they just beat him down and then walked off. Poor Cedric. Now onto the main show, which began with Seth Rollins and Braun Strowman defending the Raw Tag Team Championship against Dolph Ziggler and Robert Roode. The vibe I got from this match was kind of a standard Raw Tag Team match. A pretty good one, like an above average tag match I'd say, but not quite on the level, I guess, of a pay-per-view match that you may expect. Certainly not one that was opening the main portion of the show. And I think you could probably say that was the story of this show all the way through, really. Matches that were pretty decent now and then, but didn't really hit the heights that we've become accustomed into thanks to some wonderful takeovers, some really exciting AEW events, and some WWE pay-per-views this year, main roster pay-per-views, that were quite a lot better than this one. I will say though that since he's been teaming with Seth, Braun Strowman has established himself as one of the best hot tags in the wrestling world. I can't think of anybody who comes off the apron with as much steam as Braun Strowman does, just charging around the ring and outside of the ring as well. It's always an exciting portion of his matches with Seth. A little bit later on with Seth as the legal man once again, it looked like he was about to have the match won. He hit the ropes looking to hit Roode with the stomp, but Ziggler was on the outside and snagged his leg. Strowman got involved to even the odds and charged across the ring, knocking Roode into Rollins, who then hit the corner, and that allowed for a little bit of a shenanigan-filled finish. Strowman looked a little bit annoyed about what he'd done. This was totally accidental. It wasn't a heel turn from Strowman or anything like that, and he was in fact low-bridged out of the ring by Ziggler, leaving Rollins alone to be hit with the glorious DDT, and the Universal Champion takes a pinfall, losing the Raw Tag Team Championships. After the match, Strowman and Rollins didn't come to blows, but they certainly didn't look happy with each other. Strowman walked off straight to the back and into an interview segment where he basically said, "I didn't lose those titles, Seth Rollins did. He's on a losing streak now, and in tonight's main event, I'm going to ensure that that continues." Next up, maybe the most surprisingly short match of the night. I don't know if it actually was the shortest match on the card, but it was probably the one, I think it's fair to say, that went a lot shorter than many people probably expected it to. It was the SmackDown Women's Championship match between the champion Bayley, the newly heel Bayley, and her challenger Charlotte Flair in her hometown, which is never a good omen in professional wrestling. Charlotte got off to a hot start as well, like AJ Styles and like Drew Gulak before her. This happened quite a lot tonight, yeah. Charlotte charged straight across the ring, smacking Bayley with a big boot for a 2 count, and from then on, it was pretty much a tale of Charlotte dominating the match, working the leg and doing her intense Charlotte Flair things. But before much time had elapsed at all, really, Bayley was down in the corner selling and managed to pull off the bottom corner turnbuckle pad, and then Charlotte didn't see that, obviously, neither did the referee. She wandered over really casually and a little bit naively, I think it's probably also fair to say, and Bayley yanked her into the exposed turnbuckle, and that was enough to get the 3 count. A bit of an underwhelming 3 count, actually, as the crowd didn't really react at all. They kind of went like, oh, okay then, and Bayley didn't stick around either, grabbing her title and heading for the hills. Next up, the SmackDown Tag Team Championship, pitting the champions The New Day, Big E and Xavier Woods, who, remember, has been severely weakened by the Revival and Randy Orton in recent weeks, taking on Scott Dawson and Dash Wilder. Because Woods was, I guess, the guy returning from injury in this match, he actually took the hot tag in this match. Normally Big E would take the hot tag, but it was Woods running wild and kind of stealing the show, which was nice to see, because in New Day matches, it's often Kofi and Big E that take the majority of the spotlight, and Woods is often either the man on the outside, or in 6-man matches or matches that he's involved in, it's often Big E or Kofi, if he's involved, who have the lion's share of the offense. So this was a nice little change up, and it was pretty refreshing to see Woods get a lot of the action. Woods ran wild for a little bit, but eventually tweaked his knee, his injured knee, and that led to the Revival isolating him in the ring, hitting the Shatter Machine on Big E on the outside and just taking him out of the equation. They hit another Shatter Machine on Woods in the ring, and it looked like they had it won. Dawson was about to go for the pinfall, but Wilder stopped him and went, no, go after the knee a little bit more, and Dawson did put a submission hold on Xavier Woods, and after some great valiant babyface selling from Woods, some really defiant selling, he actually couldn't make the ropes and was forced to tap out, and we have new SmackDown Tag Team Champions. I think it's probably quite interesting to point out at this stage that, including the Kickoff show matches, we had 5 straight heel victories in a row to begin the show, which is an interesting way of doing things. I'm not sure if it was a deliberate ordering of the card by WWE or if it's just the way things went on the night. This was probably one of the strongest matches on the show, just from a pure in-ring work rate standpoint. All 4 guys are great wrestlers, and all 4 of them played their roles really well too. The star man, despite being on the losing side, was Xavier Woods, not just with his selling of that climactic submission hold, but also just before that as well, when the Revival was standing 2-on-1 across from him in the ring, and he really fired up and dealt a few blows, and was then, overcame by the numbers game. But it was a really good showing from Woods. All 4 men did a really good job, and yeah, pound for pound, in terms of pure work rate, it probably was one of my favourite matches of the night. Next up, the Women's Tag Team Championship match, pitting Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross, the champions, against their challengers in the form of Fire and Desire, Mandy Rose and Sonya Deville. The babyfaces took control of the opening stages here, with Nikki Cross really getting the crowd on her side actually. She got a pretty big reaction, mocking Mandy Rose's, sexy poses and dances and all that sort of thing. And yeah, she did get a pretty big pop for that actually. And despite this being, I guess, one of the weaker matches on the card, it was one that did seem to have the crowd invested, at least in those early stages. But then the 24/7 division ran out because, of course, this is Clash of Champions. Every single title will make an appearance. And although it wasn't officially defended on the show, it did make an appearance, with R-Truth rushing out to the ring, pursued by a horde of, the undercard. He got in the ring and Alexa Bliss rolled him up for 2. I would have liked to have seen Alexa Bliss win the 24/7 title in the middle of her own match. I think that would have been a cool little thing that I don't think we've seen yet, maybe in the 24/7 division. We might have, but I can't remember it happening. Certainly not anyway on pay-per-view. But yes, Truth was able to kick out at 2, and he and Carmella headed for the hills on the outside, pursued by all the rest of that 24/7 division, I guess we can call it. And not long after that, Nikki Cross was able to secure the win for her team, pinning Mandy Rose, putting an end to, I guess, that very short and slightly controversial feud where Mandy called her ugly and referred to herself as beautiful and everything. And basically, that was the story of the match. The babyfaces won, the crowd seemed to enjoy it, and it was a nice feel-good moment. And the first babyface win 6 matches into the night. Next, we had the IC title match, the champion Shinsuke Nakamura taking on The Miz. And of course, Nakamura was accompanied by his new manager, I guess we're going to call him, Sami Zayn. Sami Zayn cut a heel promo before Nakamura made his entrance, wearing a neck brace, selling that chokeslam from The Undertaker on SmackDown, which you just love to see. And Nakamura's entrance revealed a new little character development for Nakamura, which is that he wears a cape now. Lovely. For the first few minutes of this match, actually, Sami had a live mic on the outside of the ring and was basically cutting an elongated heel promo as the match wore on a little bit, until they cut his mic for whatever reason. I'm not quite certain what that was about. It didn't seem to be a particular spot that they drew attention to. His mic was working one moment and then they cut it the next. I don't really understand what they were going for there. A little bit later on, when the action had spilled to the outside, The Miz actually took the mic from Sami and just launched it up the ramp, which got a nice pop, but I think it would have been more effective if the mic had still been switched on. The Miz was actually working the leg throughout this match, trying to set up that figure 4 leg lock, which could have been a viable way of him actually winning this match, because it was obviously in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the Carolinas are Ric Flair country. But instead, he was able to make the ropes, Nakamura that is, and a little bit later on, take advantage of a Sami Zayn distraction to hit The Miz with that Kinshasa to the back of the head, which isn't the Kinshasa for some reason, even though you could argue that it's actually more dangerous because it's going to the back of the head. And it's still a running knee. I've never understood that, to be honest. Miz kicked out at 2 because it's not the real Kinshasa, of course, but later on was able to hit his finisher, the skull-crushing finale, but at the perfect time, Sami Zayn distracted the referee, allowing Nakamura to stay in the match. Miz then lost his temper and chased Sami around the ring. This, of course, led to Nakamura gaining the advantage, hitting The Miz with a kick as he rounded one of the corners of the ring, rolling him back in and hitting the real Kinshasa to pick up the 3 count and retain that Intercontinental Championship. Next up, we get to probably the most intense match of a show that you could argue was lacking in intensity. The Raw Women's title match between Sasha Banks and the champion, Becky Lynch. This was really back and forth and quite compelling for a lot of the match. I wouldn't say that it was either woman's best singles match of their main roster career, but it was still a good showing by both women, reminding us all, of course, that they're not just 2 of the biggest stars in women's wrestling, but 2 of the better women's wrestlers out there as well, certainly in WWE. Sasha was going for the Banks statement a lot, but Becky would power out or roll it into a pinning predicament or make the ropes, and it was really good at keeping us on the edge of our seats. It was quite difficult to predict which way this one was going to go. There was a really convincing false finish as well, at least in my opinion, because Sasha hit a pair of backstabbers and another Banks statement, but they rolled into the ropes, and then because she was so frustrated about not being able to put Becky away, Sasha got a chair from under the ring. The referee went to throw it out the other side, and while he was doing that, Sasha got a second chair out, hit Becky in the gut, rolled in the ring, and hit her with a knee to the face, which we don't really see her use that often, I guess. She uses the Meteora quite a lot, but this was a single knee straight to the face, and I thought it was going to put Becky away, but instead, the champion kicked out at 2. Then my least favourite moment of the match, to be honest, because it didn't really make sense. Sasha went to use the chair, and it's why would you do that? This is your chance to win the title. Don't get yourself disqualified. The referee took it off her anyway. Becky ended up with the chair, went for Sasha. Sasha ducked, and she blasted the referee, and he was gone for the rest of the match. That was enough to completely take him out of the equation. They then had a really intense brawl up through the crowd with no official to stop them or count them out, I guess, with Becky putting the disarmer on through one of the railings on the steps, like leading up to the concessions area. They got into the concessions area. Becky threw mustard on Sasha. I hope that Sasha's not like Matt Hardy and strongly dislikes mustard, or that would have been very unpleasant indeed. And then they brawled all the way back down the steps to the ringside area. It was a good brawl, this. It was good. The crowd were really into it. They got back in the ring with Becky comfortably on top now. She demolished Sasha with a few chair shots and then put on a disarmer through the chair as well and just kept it on. There was no referee. She just kept it on. Sasha was tapping out and begging her to stop, and eventually referees and backstage officials had to come out and physically drag Becky off of Sasha Banks. It was then ruled that Becky had been disqualified, presumably just from backstage, because the referee was nowhere to be seen. I think he was unconscious still by this point. And basically it was announced that Becky had lost the match for attacking an official. Kevin Owens tweeted, I guess that means Becky's fired now. And yeah, we got a non-finish really, a non-clean finish at least. Sasha Banks technically won by DQ, but of course the title didn't change hands. While a lot of people might be frustrated with this, I do think it does add fuel to a rematch. We're absolutely going to see a rematch, hopefully, inside of Hell in a Cell, because both women proved that they really do have the intensity in this feud to warrant such a stipulation. Next up, the WWE Championship match between Randy Orton and Kofi Kingston. This was poorly placed on the card, I'll say, because after a really intense, really quite exciting women's title match, or the Raw women's title match between Becky and Sasha, we now had a very slow, very ponderous affair between Kofi and Big Randall Keith. Outside of the ring and on the mic and everything, for the most part, this feud has been excellent. Both men have really brought the goods on the microphone and in non-match segments, like Kofi again putting Orton through a table at MSG like he did all those years ago. That's all been great for the most part, but their matches have felt like they've been lacking a little something, and this match felt very, very similar to their previous one in that it just never hit those higher gears. There's not actually that much to report in terms of unique spots or anything. This really did feel like a longer version of the match they'd have on TV against each other. Orton went for the RKO, Kofi rolled him up for two, and then Orton got an RKO out of nowhere, but Kofi was near enough to the ropes to drape his foot across the bottom one and break the pinfall. Orton then went for the punt kick, which we don't see him use as often as we used to, certainly, but Kofi was able to move out of the way at the last second, turn into a Trouble in Paradise, and retain the WWE title. Even though I'm a fan of both men, I do have to say that the action in this match was pretty ponderous and pretty hard to get into, and it was followed up by another match that I think, apart from its finish, could also be described as a little bit plodding, the no DQ match between Roman Reigns and Eric Rowan. Reigns started off the match really full of fire and intensity, attacking Rowan as he was making his entrance on the ramp, and then they went into the crowd and they were hitting each other with trash cans and stuff, and if it hadn't been for that Becky Lynch and Sasha Banks crowd brawl not too long ago, it would have been a lot more effective, I think. It was still pretty good though, the crowd brawling section, but then once they got back into the ring, it just kind of turned into a normal match for quite a long time, which for a no DQ contest is a little bit disappointing, especially because Roman Reigns, I think, always delivers the goods in these sort of street fight style matches. It was sad not to see more weapons involved. They used a Singapore cane or a kendo stick here and there. They used the ring steps a couple of times, but it never really had that wild feel. In fairness though, the match did probably provide us with the best individual spot of the show, which was Roman Reigns just being scooped up effortlessly by Eric Rowan into a huge, excellent powerbomb through one of the announce tables. Roman was put through a second table, this time up by the production area, but he was able to even the odds with like a stick or something that he found. I don't know what it was, a piece of camera equipment maybe. Commentary didn't know what it was either, to be honest. They were much help identifying that foreign object, but it turned the tide in the favor of Roman. Not Rowan. I'm so surprised I haven't made that mistake already in this video. It turned the tide in the favor of the big dog, Roman Reigns, who then used that camera jib that Rowan used on him recently, driving it into Eric Rowan again and again, and eventually sending Rowan spilling down the entrance ramp after a big Superman punch. From this moment, it looked as though Roman was about to have the match won, charging down the ramp, looking for a big spear on Eric Rowan, but instead he was met by a big boot, not from Rowan, but by Luke bloody Harper. He's back on the main roster, and judging by the pop he got, I think a lot of people are very happy about that. Together, now reunited once again, the Bludgeon Brothers laid out Roman Reigns, and Eric Rowan was able to pick up, I guess, a tainted victory, but it's a no DQ match. The story here, though, was very much about Luke Harper's return. Going forwards, I'm not certain if they're going to continue this whole Eric Rowan trying to end Roman Reigns' career angle that they've got going on, which has been a bit confusing week to week, or if they're just going to go with the story of Luke Harper returning and the tag team being reunited. Hopefully, at least in my opinion, they do drop the whole murder mystery style stuff, because it really wasn't working that well. But yeah, that was one of the more exciting moments of the night, to be honest, certainly judging by the crowd response that it got. And then we moved into the main event, which also was probably one of the better things on the show, at least in terms of in-ring action. The Universal title match between Seth Rollins and Braun Strowman. This followed like the Brock Lesnar blueprint a little bit, in that it was a fairly short match, lots of finishes being thrown at each other, and basically it paid off in my opinion. It was pretty fun in terms of action. Not like match of the year level stuff or anything like that, but it was fun for what it was. It got off to a fast start, Strowman just trucking Seth Rollins, going for the running power slam, but Rollins slipping out the back and managing to take control. A little bit later he had a frog splash and Strowman kicked out even before the count of 1. Rollins then assumed control a little bit, hitting a drop toe hold, a nice move actually on Strowman, which sent him just flying over the German announce table, and then Seth hit several suicide dives onto Strowman, and from him collapsing backwards into that announce table, it eventually buckled and broke under his weight. At some point in that whole little part of the match, Strowman, it looked like, suffered a legit cut to his face. It wasn't too bad, but it did sort of add to the match a little bit. Hopefully he's okay. It didn't look too bad. It didn't look as nasty as Jericho's, which was of course planned in AEW. But from something that probably didn't, hopefully at least, harm Strowman that much, to something that almost definitely would have done if it had gone wrong, and it almost did. He attempted a top rope splash and nearly fell backwards, and he's such a large man. I think everyone collectively kind of went, oh, as he was teetering on the top rope, but he regained his balance and hit a huge splash, Walter-esque. I guess he's been watching some NXT UK, and just squashing Rollins beneath his weight. I think they did a wise thing here in that Strowman tweaked his knee on the landing and had to sell it for a couple of seconds, so that when Rollins kicked out, it wasn't too unbelievable or outrageous of a kick out, because he had just been squashed by an absolutely huge man. Rollins then hit the stomp. Strowman kicked out a 1, which really popped the crowd huge. It was a very nice moment, one that you often see in places like New Japan and on the indies, but not so much in WWE, but it's really believable when someone like Strowman does it. Rollins again went for a second stomp. This time Strowman kicked out a 2. Then he hit a third stomp, and it seemed as though Strowman was going to stay down, but he kicked out right on the stroke of 3, and the crowd came alive. The crowd, by the way, were largely behind Braun in this one. Strowman went for another running power slam attempt, but his knee gave out because he tweaked it on that splash from before, and this allowed Rollins to hit the pedigree, which we've not seen him use for quite some time, and then a 4th stomp, and finally that was enough to put Braun Strowman down and help him retain the Universal Championship. But the night wasn't over yet. As Seth made his way up to the stage with his title, celebrating and everything, the lights went down and the crowd came unglued because they knew exactly what was about to happen. This was probably the loudest reaction of the entire night, followed closely by, I guess, Luke Harper's return. But yeah, when the lights came back on, all flickering and eerie and everything, of course The Fiend was at the top of the ramp, and he hit Seth Rollins with Sister Abigail, clamped on the mandible claw, and the show came to an end with The Fiend, Bray Wyatt, whatever you want to call him, laughing maniacally, and I guess establishing himself as the next challenger for the Universal title. At least I hope that's what's going to happen, because when Wyatt said he was going to call out either Rollins or Strowman for Hell in a Cell, he didn't really mention the Universal title at all. But I really would like to see this be a title match, and I would like to see Bray Wyatt become the Universal Champion. I think he totally deserves it. His whole character reinvention thing has been absolutely amazing. It ended the show on a really high note. Everyone loved that. But for the most part, I think it's fair to say the Clash of the Champions was, if I had to describe it in one word, it would probably be underwhelming, maybe run-of-the-mill. That's several words, but not if you use hyphens. It wasn't a show that really ticked all the boxes for me. So that is what happened at Clash of Champions 2019. Yeah, a bit of an average show from time to time, but I guess the main event delivered. The SmackDown Tag Team match was really good. I enjoyed the Revival versus The New Day, and Sasha Banks and Becky Lynch certainly brought the intensity, even if there wasn't a decisive finish. Apart from that, yeah, there's not too much to shout about, but hopefully they continue to gather momentum heading into Hell in a Cell. Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments section down below. You can follow Cultaholic on Twitter at Cultaholic and on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do, then please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic, where you can pledge. And don't forget, of course, most importantly of all, to hit subscribe and to join us.